name is Jigar. I'm an implementation manager at Odoo San Francisco office. My team specializes in creating a tailored solution using Odoo for any size and any type of businesses. We implement Odoo, we do gap analysis and implement Odoo for all customers, and we make sure that given services are provided to the customer. Today I'll be providing some details on what are the best practices in handling the performance issue. Performance issue is a really big time problem. A lot of time because people do not know what are the right tools, what is the right way to approach this, how should we deal with this performance issue, and because of that it creates a lot of headache, and usually customers or partners ends up being frustrated just because they are not aware that what is the right tool and what is the right way to approach this. So this talk aims to aid in that area. We'll try to show you how to approach this performance problem. What are the options that you have? What are the setup that is required? And what are the tools that you have to work with the problem? In a usual Odoo setup, right, there are three main components, which is POP that you see on the screen, which is Python, of course, because Odoo is built in Python. So Python is one of the component where all the business logic will be written and the business logic will execute. Odoo, of course, Odoo being the framework, Odoo framework is the main layer which is responsible for translating user data into database, right? So Odoo and Postgres. Postgres is the most important element. Most of the time it is overlooked, it's undertreated and not given enough attention. But this is one of the slowest component in entire setup. Practically, on theory, Odoo can go super fast, whereas Postgres is the anchor to Odoo, rather, because of course any data warehouse data software is inherently in nature slow. So does Postgres will also behave slow if you do not set it up correctly, if you do not give enough treatment and things like that. So we'll see how to, when you have a performance problem, how to deal with this thing. I will not be talking about issues such as how to deploy my Odoo, right? There's a separate talk that has happened in previous Odoo experience. You can go and revisit them, but I'm not going to talk about deployment and things like that. If you're here for that, then maybe you want to look for another option. But this is purely if there is a performance problem in your Odoo setup, then how do you find a performance problem, and what are the tools that you have, and what is the setup that you could use. So first thing that you need to know is your deployment information. Usually when it comes to looking for an performance problem, first thing that we want to know is what is your deployment platform, how your server is deployed. We need to know that information. If you do not know that information, then probably it's very difficult for you to imagine how server is running, where is it running, what is the setup. You don't understand that. So first thing that you want to know is you want to understand the setup. If you are not aware, or if you are not familiar with the setup, you have to ask those questions. So the question says such as, on what platform you are using Odoo, what is operating system, what is the version of the operating system, what is the version of Odoo installed on the server, is it up to date with the latest release on a GitHub, if it's a older version, then how old it is, what is the deployment architecture, hardware spec, number of machines, is there any load balancer installed, are there any virtual machines being used in your setup. So those kind of questions you need to know. For architecture and deployment server hardware spec, you can use commands such as inix. Inix is a very simple utility. If you say inix -FXZ, it will give you very brief information about your server, and it's very concise, and it's very enough for you to understand that what kind of a server you are looking at. Alternate to Unix is hwinfo short, and that also gives you the same information. So important step being here, you need to know the deployment server platform. If you are not aware what is a platform, then the first step out of the door is wrong, because you don't know what you are stepping into. So you need to know that. And also a few questions like, are there web services integrated with Odoo API? If there is a web services, then what is the volume of the web services? What kind of a transaction we are looking at? Are the web services are being called in a parallel, because that could affect the performance of the system? And is there any monitoring system placed in? Because if you in a simple one line statement, what you cannot fix what you can't monitor. It's very generic statement, of course, but you need to understand that if you can't monitor, that means you cannot tell what is exactly wrong. That means you can't fix it. That's why you can't fix what you can't monitor, and that's why every system that you have deployed should have some kind of monitoring system to tell that what is wrong with it, unless you know in your head that what could be wrong, right? Of course, we can always do the guesswork, and we can always try A, B, C, Z option, but that's not the efficient approach. It's not a best practice when I say that. The setup that you need, right, to work with this thing. The first rule of thumb that we always follow is never have a production database on your computer. Reason being, your computers, most of the computers that I see or we see, are not set up correctly. For example, my computer has a hard disk encryption, it has SSH tunnels and everything. So in case even if I lose my computer, there are high encryption applied to the computer, so there's likely chances that there won't be any data security issue. But it is very well possible that poorly configured machine can lead to data breach and can create a data security. So make sure you do not have any production database or production grade system, production grade data on your computer. You should always use SSH tunnels, or you have to make sure that machine that you are using is correct to handle that kind of a data security that you are trying to manage on your computer. And usually your computer do not have the same setup as server grade infrastructure, right? That's why your computer is not the best tool. Rather, you should use remote servers where everything is stored remotely, and you don't have to worry about the data security. For accessing the remote server, usually the tools that we use is Linux computer, because Linux is more simple, efficient. We use Ubuntu most commonly because we have most experience with it, but you can use any Linux flavor that is comfortable to you and you are okay. SSH access, set up an SSH access to your server. If you do not have yet SSH access, then you should probably start thinking about setting up the SSH access to your server. Without SSH access, you won't be able to make a secure call, because SSH will make an SSH tunnel. Of course, there are alternate options other than SSH, but SSH is the most easiest way to set up, and it's most efficient way to do that. Communication with the tunnel, secure tunnel. And we use many command line tools, because again, command line tools are most efficient, most simple, and does the all fuzz without any drama. So CLI tools are usually the best, but if you are not comfortable with CLI tool, and if you wish to use some kind of graphic editor, it's completely fine. It's not required to use the CLI tools only. But again, CLI tool, it just does the whole thing without any fuzz. Now, important thing is reading your log. Most of the time when you have performance problem, the first thing is overlooked is log. Log are not processed correctly, logs are not translated correctly, and that's why people run into issues because they cannot identify where is the exact problem. So for example, look for an timeout. Is your server running into timeout? If your server is running into timeout, that means there is something wrong with your setup, or some user is trying to do something. Easiest way to find out your timeout is probably look for CPU timeout or memory limit exceeded grabs. There are a few examples code that you see on the screen that shows that how you can do that. But the bottom line being here, you need to find out those beforehand to see if there is something like that. Your server configuration is hitting the limit where it's what is set. Similar to this, is there any serialization or concurrency happening on your server? Here's a simple graph that will tell you if there is serialization or not. hyphen A and hyphen B is to just get you the line before and line after. They are optional. You can use if you wish. If you don't want to use, you can skip it. But usually log files are pretty large and not easy to process. So those kind of commands is very handy, and you can look through things very fast. Then finding the request processing time. Of course, there is a performance problem. That means there is something slow. There is something that is taking time. So you need to figure out which request is taking time. So to figure out the request processing time, usually on the each request log, there is a detail on how or what is the time taken and how many. All those details are already stored. The last 3 parameters of your request are that detail that you are looking for. For example, the third information from the last is the number of queries executed in the database. So the minus 3 index on that line represents the queries, number of queries that is executed by that number of that request that was sent. Similar to that, the second last parameter is the actual query execution time. So how much time those query took to execute on the database level. So that is on the second last parameter. And the last parameter is the total execution time minus query time. So it's actual execution time taken on the server that was not spent to query the data. It is the only processing time that was used on the server, right? So you could see the very trivial information right off the bat. By translating this log and by reading the right information, you can tell that which request took the longest and which request took most time where. So is it more time spending on a Postgres? Remember I said at the early beginning of the presentation, the Postgres is the most often overlooked or not given right treatment in terms of performance tuning. So you could easily identify that, okay, for example, here example is RES. A simple example that I could pick is stock picking read is executing 109 queries, and it's taking 0.029 millisecond to read those queries, and it's only taking 0.07 seconds to do the execution on the server side itself without execution. So you can tell that what is the most slowest. And in all these 3 number will be also colored based on their certain number. So there is a normal log, there is a warning log, and there is an alarming log. So 0 to 100 in number of query will be regular, it will be white, but 100 to 1000 will be yellow. So if your number of query is between 100 and 1000, then they will be yellow, and if your number of query is more than 1000, then they will be red. So that number will come as a red. Similar to query execution time. If your query execution time is 0, then it's a white. Your query execution time is between 0.01 and 3, then it will be yellow, and it's more than 3, then red. And similar to that, the total execution time is between 0 and 1, then normal, white, 1 to 5 is yellow, and 5 above is red, alarming. So it right off the bat, by reading of the log, you can tell where is the problem. Is it the problem is at the database level, or problem is at the Odoo level. Now once you, and of course, you need to translate this easily. So here's some command that gives you that. So for example, if you want to short on all the processing time of request, then here that query will tell you the request processing time. Similar to parsing and shorting a query of execution time, in that there should not be -1, it should be just $NF. It's a typo, but it's similar to that. You could see that second last you can sum and total on them, and similar to that, last element you can sum and short on them. You can find the most expensive RPC call on your server just like that. It's pretty simple. You can process more than one file. When you say cat, you can cat multiple files, and you can also read through multiple files very easily. Very similar to that, the request processing time. If you want to get an hourly request processing time, the command that you are seeing will give you the hourly request processing time. Very similar to that, the last command, if you want to get the most request IP on your server, this is IPv4 regex. You can grab and you can find the IPv4 who is sending the most amount of requests on your server to find the most number of requests, where is it originating from. The first query in the same section represents the number of query processed every hour. So it can also tell you that how many number of requests that we are processing every 1 hour. So that way you can see that on the server during 24 hours, what are the peak times and what are the low times of a number of queries being sent to the server. So as you could see, this has a simple command, and they will give you very much detailed information right off the bat to identify where exactly the problem is. Is it on the Odoo side or is it on the Postgres side? Once you identify that, of course, then you will try to go to the next step. But important thing is reproducing is a key. If you cannot reproduce, then you should not spend your time on it. You should be asking user to give you a right step to reproduce a problem. Without being able to reproduce it, you should not invest your time, because that will not help you, as you will be doing a lot of guesswork about something and which will go nowhere. So reproducing is the key, and that should be and of course, once you reproduce, you should be reproducing and you should be able to automating it, because during the performance problem fixing, you will be spending a lot of time into doing trial and error. So you won't be doing this manually all the time. So you should be able to reproduce and then also automate the reproduction part, so that you don't have to keep doing everything. So reproducing and automating is the founding stone. Then once you identify where is the problem, let's say the problem is on the Odoo side or a Python side, then you use a profiler. The profiler is your tool. Profiler will let you profile the code and will let you find the time taken to execute the piece of code. There are two different options. There are two different profilers available: a graph method and log method. These are out of the box. In a graph method, what you can do is you can import a profiler from the tools miscellaneous, and then it will generate a profile, and you can generate that profile into X dot, and then you can see the complete execution graph, and each node in the execution, it will also tell the amount of time and the percentage of time that is spent on that piece of code. So the graph method is very efficient, and the good part about the graph method is it goes all the way to every single call that is made to the server. So if from your call all the way to the ORM database call, all the way to the Python processing, everything will be found in a single file. It's extremely useful, and it's very stupid to use. You just put that 2 line, that's it, and you can find it very easily. Log method, and if you're using Odoo.sh on your staging branch, you can do that in a matter of 2 minutes. It takes 2 minutes to set that up, and you can get your profile of the code. It takes literally minute to figure it out. A log method, as you could see, in a log method you put a logger on the method itself, and then it prints a log method with how much time spent on each line. But the downside of this is, if you are only targeting a single method, if you want to improve the core of single method, then this is more useful. Whereas the graph method will give you the big picture. It will tell you where is exactly the problem, and then you can narrow it down, and then you can go to the log method and you can focus on a single method where you find is the problem, and then you can focus on the problem with the log method, saying that which exact lines are costing more. So these two methods are not alternative of each other. They should be used in a sequence, one by one. Right? The next is a PiSpy. PiSpy is a very simple tool. It's a sampling profile. What it does, it does 100 samples a second of execution. What does PiSpy do is, a PiSpy does not run with your program. It runs on a side of your program, and it does a sampling of your data from your running execution, and it can also give you the graph, the flaming graph of execution. And if you have multiple thread, then it will also show you the graph of a multiple thread at the same time. The only thing is, the PiSpy will work better if you use the elevated access right using sudo or root-like access right. If you use a root-like access right, then PiSpy is way efficient. The good part about the PiSpy is it does not require of a restarting of a server. So if you wish to debug your production, PiSpy can help you with a debug production, and you can debug something. You can generate a flame graph, or you can also do like htop, like a live snippet, execution of a live snippet using PiSpy top. Or you can also use a PiSpy dump to dump the execution stack trace. So PiSpy is very efficient tool. It does not require rebooting of the server, and it's as simple as just shooting those commands. But as I said, using them with a sudo-like environment will give you efficient result and will work better. And of course, a PiSpy will always take a PID, so you need to know your process ID. It can generate a flame graph as well as it can generate a speed scope. Speed scope is another way of looking your log, but a flame graph or speed scope both will do the job for you. Okay, so these are the tools that you could use for profiling Odoo code, and these are enough tools. Every day when we have a performance problem, for somebody we use one of these tools, and that does the job. We can identify performance problem in no time. All it takes is you have to make sure that you have right setup. Next is a Postgres. A Postgres is the most underrated or not given right treatment. So whenever you are setting up Odoo, first thing that you want to make sure your Postgres is set up correctly. This parameter that you're looking on the screen, such as shared buffer for data caching, wall buffer for IO double caching, effective cache size for caching of data, work memory for doing a memory transaction, and maintenance work memory for vacuum kind of transaction. Those parameter needs to be taken care. There is also a worker that you could use with the Postgres. That is also important parameter. So use those parameter and do right configuration. Using tools such as pgtune to get your initial configuration is worthwhile. But of course, as I said earlier, you cannot fix what you can't monitor. So what you should do is you should monitor as well. So use pgtune and then monitor. PG Activity, next tool is PG Activity, will give you the live snippet into the current execution, and you can see the current executing queries with the PG Activity very easily. PG state statement. PG state statement, what it will do is it will record all the transaction of the SQL happening on the Postgres level. And there are some execution that I have, some queries that I have written here. For example, how to create a PG statement extension, how to reset the extension, and how to get the most top 20 expensive query using a PG statement, and it will give you the top 20 expensive queries very easily. And then you can delete extension once it's done. So PG extension, again, it does not require reboot of anything. Once you have PG statement extension set up on the Postgres level, you can use it as you go. So this can be useful. Of course, PG statement adds probably 10% of the overhead on a read-write statement when you enable the extension. So do not abuse it. Use it when you need it. Very similar to PG Activity, PG Badger. PG Badger is also very Postgres log analyzing tool. What does PG Badger do is it does monitor all the log of the server, and then it simply it puts everything together, and it puts you into graphs and things like that, and then you can analyze the results, and you can see what was slow, what took so much time, and so on and so forth. So PG stat statement and PG Badger are alternative tool of each other. You can use either of them. Either of them would require a different setup. You can follow the link over there and you can perform your setup, but these are the tools that you could use at the Postgres level. Here's a diagram that's that will help you win the performance problem. First, do your setup. Second, reproduce. Reproducing it the right way is the important. Doing it manually is not efficient. You should be able to reproduce and you should be able to automate, as I said earlier, and doing it manually is not efficient. Then observe. So reproduce, next is monitor where is the problem. Then analyze your results. So once you observe, you have the data, analyze your data, and then find the problem, fix it, reproduce it, and keep going as many times as you need to go until you analyze and you find that, okay, I have the result that is acceptable. And once you are acceptable, just finish your job, fix it, and release it, and that's the end of performance problem. So to give you to again revise everything quickly, there are three main components: POP, Python, Odoo, and Postgres. First thing is reproducing is the key. At the step 1, if you don't know how to reproduce, don't waste your time. Go back and get information on how to reproduce this, because if you waste your time reproducing it without knowing what you're doing, it's a waste of time, energy, and money. Second thing is read your log and see exactly where is the problem. Is it at Odoo level or is it Postgres level? And based on where is the problem, use a profiler or use any PG tool to identify the problem. Make a right fix and test it and observe it and keep doing until you reach the desired result, and that will get you, that will conquer the performance problem. So these are the tools which you should always set up on your computer or on your server, because you can use them as you need them. Right. So thank you everyone for being here and listening to me. Of course, you might have a lot of questions. If you have any question, that we'll be answering them now. And again, thank you for listening to the presentation, and I hope that these tools and this information will help you in the future whenever you have performance problem, and this will tell you what are the tools you have and how to deal with them. Thank you everyone. Bye.